So we're so excited to have John Sides, who writes for the Monkey Cage blog at the Washington Post, but you wear many hats, John. So why don't you tell us a little bit about the various hats that you wear and your background?
Well, I'm a political scientist and a professor in the department here at George Washington University. And I study elections and campaigns and public opinion. In addition to that, I help to run the Monkey Cage, which is a site about politics and political science, where we try to use political science to illuminate political events of the day.
Why is it called the Monkey Cage blog? I have to ask.
Oh, that was going to be my question. Good.
Sure. When we started it in 2007, back when we were just a tiny independent blog, we chose it because of a quote from the writer H.L. Mencken, who said that democracy is the art of running the circus from the monkey cage. And so we thought that might be a little bit more of a catchy name than a lot of the other boring things we could come up with that involved the word politics or professors or political science or whatever else we could think about.
Oh, that's good. We love it.
Well,
that's
between
great.
you guys and SurveyMonkey, I feel like primates are very hot in the political science and survey world these days.
Totally.
I think between us and SurveyMonkey, we're trying to show that something with the name monkey in it can actually be relatively serious. I'm not sure if we're succeeding yet.
I've been doing the same thing with selfies, so I share your plight.
So
Sure.
free idea. Have some sort of selfie monkey, and you will be
Selfie monkey.
you will be a zillionaire. God. The end. Interview over. Let's go run out and have wild riches. So that's good background. And so the Monkey Cage blog lives independently from the articles we see regularly at the Washington Post, though, as well, correct?
Well, our old site lives independently at themonkeykage.org. And we live semi-independently from the Post in the sense that we do most of our own content selection, editing. In short, they don't really bear any blame or responsibility for the kinds of stuff that we publish. But the arrangement that we have with them is just a really nice one where we can continue to do what we do without some of the pressures that I think you would get if you actually had to be directly part of a larger news organization. At the same time, we get a huge platform and their excellent brand to help to promote our own content. And it's really been, dare I say, a game changer for the sort of size of the audience that we have and for the breadth of people that read it.
Yeah, it's been so interesting watching the academic world of political science become much more kind of mainstream or consumable or accessible to people who do not have the ability to log into JSTOR. So tell us a little bit about sort of how you got started in political science and what you have seen in terms of the the evolution of who is consuming or interested in this stuff. How has that gone over the course of your career to now you're writing stuff that winds up at the Washington Post and sort of shapes part of the narrative of what people think about this race?
So when we started the Monkey Cage in 2007, our feeling was that political scientists were underrepresented as public intellectuals in the broader blogosphere at that time. You saw a lot of really prominent economists blogging. I mean, probably the most prominent being Paul Krugman because of his platform at the New York Times. And I think we felt like the political science community just didn't have a similar outlet. And more generally, we were oftentimes dismayed or disgruntled by some of the news coverage of politics that we saw that we felt really didn't reflect the findings of political science research and oftentimes got things wrong. So we stepped in, I think, to try to provide a perspective that would use political science and try to take away some of the impenetrable jargon and statistics and everything and make it seem accessible and relevant to what's going on. I think we were aided in that task by a different generation, maybe of political writers and reporters who were interested in numbers, interested in data, interested in what political science had to say. And I think, the short list of those people are the usual suspects, people like Nate Silver and Ezra Klein and others. And I think for our purposes, they were enormous force multipliers, people that could not only read us and link to us, but in some sense baked political science into their way of thinking about politics. And I think showed that you could do good political writing that's interesting and thoughtful, but also at the same time really well informed by what academic political scientists have found.
Now, one of the things you just mentioned is that, oftentimes when people would be covering politics, they weren't necessarily, coming from a knowledge of the literature about how this stuff works. What are some of the biggest sort of misconceptions or things that are accepted as conventional wisdom that you'll see pundits or political reporters talk about that drive you crazy because there's research out there that says, no, that's not the case. So an example being, I know a lot of people will say, well, the reason why Congress is so polarized is because of gerrymandering. And there are papers that suggest it's actually much more complicated than that. It's not really just gerrymandering. I mean, are there other things out there that you see, or at least that early on were big misconceptions where you said, no, everybody's got this wrong. I've got to write about this so that I can sort of get the real story out there?
I mean, one of the earliest ones was the perception that you can take the number of people who say that they're politically independent at face value, and this thinking that the independents really were the plurality group in the American electorate. And one of the things I pushed back on was all the evidence, saying that lots of independents are in some sense closet partisans. They're just not exactly eager to tell survey interviewers that they identify with or lean towards a particular political party. And I think we made some progress on that front. I think we've made some progress, at least in terms of making people more cognizant about casual narratives about what matters and doesn't matter in campaigns. There's a lot of punditry and sometimes reporting where there are, I think, fairly strikingly strong statements about the potential causal effect of something happening in the campaign. And we tend to think that we have to be more careful and have, I think, more conclusive evidence. And then one last thing, which is probably even broader, I think the political science community tends to see that presidents are limited in their powers, that presidents exist in a broader political system, and that puts constraints on what they can do. But a lot of reporting about politics really elevates the president, makes the president seemingly the most powerful person capable of doing all kinds of things if only the president would try. And political science takes, I think, a more circumscribed view.
So let's talk about some of the findings from some of the research in your latest book, The Science of Trump, which is a collection of monkey cage blog pieces. And there are a few things that, and some of them actually predate the book. One of them that we've cited a few times on the show is this causal relationship that people give. Let's go back, start with 2012 before we get to Trump, right? That the Priorities USA advertising, the super PAC that supported President Obama, that the advertising that happened in the summer defined Mitt Romney, and he was never able to recover because it was all baked in the cake and defined by the organization through early advertising. And you did a piece that suggested that seemed not to be true. What's your take? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think there are two problems with that story about the 2012 election. One is it tends to exaggerate the impact of political advertising. And in particular, it suggests that the impact of political advertising is really long-lasting and durable. Most of the research on the duration of political advertising's impact, including our work on 2012, shows that the effect is fairly short-lived. It might be gone within a few days or a week. And so, ads that Priorities USA was running in the summer of 2012 are just not likely to really penetrate and persist for months on end, such that the outcome in November really was baked in the cake in July. The other challenge, at least in our research in 2012, is that we just didn't really find much evidence that views of Romney shifted in the ways that you would think if those ads had been effective. Those ads attacked him for the practices of bank capital in terms of closing factories or hurting workers. And meanwhile, we were asking people all along, how much they thought Romney cared about the wealthy, cared about the middle class, cared about the poor, cared about people like you. And we did find there were consistent differences in how people saw Romney and Obama. They were more likely to think that Romney cared about the wealthy than the middle class. But those differences were present in January of 2012, and they really didn't change the whole duration of the campaign, including after the Priorities USA attacks, including after Romney's comments on the 47%. So again, I just don't think that I've never seen really good evidence that those ads actually changed people's minds in a way that was consequential for the outcome of the election.
And this was the sort of research that, we just talked about Science of Trump, but you also had a book that came out right after the 2012 election called The Gamble that dug into a lot of this. One thing that I think would be really relevant to our listeners, given that we focus so much on polling and what the polls say and methodology, is the way that you conducted your research for that book. And I believe what you did was you all used a panel, right, where you had a pool of people that you chose at the beginning and sort of followed that same group of people throughout the election as a way to not just track, sampling different pools of people and seeing if those different pools were varying, but rather a consistent set of voters and how those attitudes fluctuated. Can you tell us a little bit more about why you chose to go with that methodology or sort of how that wound up working?
Sure. So the design the technical term for it is a rolling re-interview. So we started in December of 2011 partnering with the firm YouGov, and they interviewed about 45,000 people in December, a very large, nationally representative cross-section of people. And then beginning in January, for the 45 weeks from January up until Election Day, they re-interviewed a random 1,000 of those initial 45,000. So I think, and then at the end of the election, after after people voted, we were able to re-interview, I think, about 35,000 of the original 45,000, just with a short interview asking them how they had voted. So the advantage of that, I think, is twofold. One is that you've got, of course, a weekly survey in the field that can give you a sense of what is happening and what's changing in reaction to the events of the campaign. But I think from our purposes, the more important thing was having this original interview relatively early in the campaign in December 2011. One of the challenges for a lot of political polling is it's just one cross-section at one point in time. And so you ask people a set of questions about the candidates, but it's very unclear, what's the chicken and what's the egg. With the panel survey, you have a measure of what respondents thought relatively early, and you can measure changes within those respondents themselves. And in some sense, that really helps you sort out, kind of what comes first. Did people come to vote for a candidate because they had a certain position on an issue? Or did people come to vote for that candidate and then change their position on the issue to match the position of the candidates? These are the questions that the panel data can help us sort out. And I think in 2016, we're continuing to do the same thing. We have a 6-wave panel in progress with the folks who run RAND's presidential election panel study. And I just feel like that's going to give us a lot more leverage on the crucial causal questions than you can get with traditional polling.
So let's talk a little bit about 2016. It seems like social science academics are just having a field day talking about Trump. There is constantly discussion over what the data are showing about why people are voting for Trump, trying to understand what's going on behind Trump support.
It's not economic anxiety. It's all racism and white nationalism.
Right.
No. It's all about whether you're economically disenfranchised.
Or your longevity or your well-being.
How long do people in your community live? No. It's about, do you have strong social ties or not? No. It's about, are you an authoritarian or not? People who are authoritarian like Trump. It's like there's a new headline every couple of weeks. Like, no, a new paper shows that actually it's whether people like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that determines if they like Trump. I mean, what do you make of all of that? What do you make of the science behind why people have gravitated toward Trump and why we have this kind of crazy political moment?
Well, I think that what's made Trump interesting is twofold. One is that he doesn't fit into standard Republican Party politics, into standard orthodox conservatism. His positions on issues.
Sorry. I had to put my partisan hat on for like half a second. Okay.
Right.
His positions on issues, don't really align with a lot of what has been traditionally true of Republican leaders. So that gives us some interesting leverage that we don't often have. And then I think the second thing is that Trump's way of talking about issues related to race and ethnicity, issues like crime or immigration, has been unusually explicit and controversial relative to other candidates. And, that's given us an opportunity then to really try to understand the impact of people's own views about race and immigration and minority groups and how they impact Trump. Thus far, I don't think we have a conclusive story about how to weigh the different potential ingredients in people's support for Trump. Our research and the research of others who've written for the Monkey Cage certainly shows that views about race and ethnicity are crucial to that story. And in particular, my co-author Michael Tesler has shown that views of race were more strongly associated with views of Trump than with views of McCain or views of Romney. Trump really is unusual. He looks more like Pat Buchanan than he does someone like Romney or McCain.
Now, in one of the papers in the book, you wrote about, or one of your co-authors, about how Republicans are not necessarily as hardline conservative on some issues as maybe Republican leaders and Republican policies are. Do you think that's part of Trump's appeal too, that he's more fluid on some things that perhaps voters are also more fluid on?
I think that Trump has revealed something that is true of American voters more generally, but especially true of Republicans, which is that they're not ideologues. They're not orthodox when it comes to kind of conventional liberalism or conventional conservatism. And within the Republican Party in particular, it's been true for a very, very long time that people who are Republicans or conservatives sort of use those labels. But in fact, if you ask their policy attitudes, they oftentimes reveal themselves to be less conservative or in fact somewhat liberal, in particular on issues related to whether we should spend money on different kinds of government programs and government programs that are relatively popular.
Keep your government hands off my Medicare.
Yeah,
right.
Those are the ones. And so, when Trump gets out there and basically says, I'm not going to touch Social Security and Medicare, he's embracing social programs that I think are relatively popular, including among Republicans. And it really contrasts sharply, I think, with, for example, what Republican leaders like Paul Ryan have advocated doing in recent years. And so this is, I think, the essence of Trump's kind of populist appeal. On the one hand, sort of endorsing certain aspects of the American welfare state, but on the other hand, being quite critical of immigration and immigrants. And I think the combination of those two things is really what's made him distinctive relative to most American politicians, including most Republicans.
So there was a story in Politico several months ago about how authoritarianism was the biggest predictor of Trump support, which people not really reading the story thought, authoritarianism, it must mean if, you're favorable toward Mussolini and Franco, and then you also like Trump. It was a little bit more nuanced about like child rearing.
Behave?
Right, exactly. But then and that was one of the most popular things we ever put on Facebook that wasn't about Triumph, the insult comic dog, or Frank Luntz. And so, but you debunked that too. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I could be persuaded that authoritarianism has some correlation with support for Trump. There's reasonable, plausible reasons for that to be the case. I think the challenge with the published research that I've seen is that you don't have a real strong sense of the relative weight of authoritarianism against other kinds of predispositions or values that people have, particularly with regard to race and ethnicity. Is it really just authoritarianism, or is it the fact that authoritarians are less favorable towards certain minority groups? And that's really the crucial thing that's driving support for Trump. And the other thing that didn't always emerge in some of the more prominent pieces on this subject is, what about the other Republican candidates in the primary? And the piece that we had on the Monkey Cage did something I don't think anybody else did, which is it actually looked at Cruz supporters and Rubio supporters. And it turns out that among both of those groups, authoritarianism was about as high or even higher in the case of Cruz than it was among Trump supporters. And so what was distinctive about Trump supporters really wasn't authoritarianism, at least when you compare them to the other Republican candidates.
Yeah, I think I've loved all of these different stories that have sort of put forward theories, but then, criticized them in part because I like the idea that we do not just have a unified theory of Trump, right? That there's not just one, this is the reason why people like Trump or don't like Trump. I mean, it feels like it makes much more sense to say there are a lot of different doors through which one may walk to enter
Trump Tower.
Enter Trump Tower. And, a big one might be the I don't like pushing one for English door. But there might be people that just want to blow everything up, and there might be people that just want to protect their Medicare, and so I've loved
and then
the way
the reluctant Republican Trump supporter,
right? And so I've really liked the way that political science allows us to effectively assess the validity or of all of these single unified theory of Trump claims that sometimes are easily floated out there by pundits.
Well, I think that's, to me, one of the big benefits of having the political science community more engaged with a broader public and with political observers during campaign season is that, I think if we're doing our job correctly, we really are using the academic tools to the best of our ability to answer, the important questions. And certainly that's what Michael Tesler and Lynn Vavreck and I are trying to do right now with a forthcoming book on the 2016 election. And again, I think everyone alike wants to get the story right, reporters and political scientists included. But I think that we're just trying to get the unique skills of political science brought to bear on these questions, so that the narrative of a campaign is not simply, constructed by cable news pundits and things like that.
Those stupid cable news pundits.
They don't know what they're talking about. so now, you would think that if this had been a non-Trump year, that having the first woman candidate would lead to lots of studies about women candidates. There was one that we spoke about that Fairleigh Dickinson University did. It was just of folks in New Jersey that showed that if you primed respondents with a question that asked them about their own personal relationship to changing gender roles, men in particular were more likely to vote for Trump than if you didn't prime them. That priming itself made men more likely to support the male candidate. I haven't seen too much monkey cage work on gender. I saw one this recent week about how Clinton's language has become more masculine over time, using different kinds of words. But why do you think, or maybe is there more stuff in the works? Why haven't we seen more studies exploring the role of gender vis-a-vis Clinton's candidacy?
Well, I think you will see those studies. Maybe what's happened over the last several months is simply that stories related to Trump himself have kind of crowded out other things, and an election that we thought would be a lot about Clinton's gender has instead become mostly about whatever controversial thing Trump said today. I think that one of the things that political science brings to bear, and this has been in a couple of different monkey cage posts, is just the evidence about the role of gender or any potential bias that female candidates experience is sort of more equivocal than I think some of the conventional stories would imply. I did an interview on the monkey cage a month or so ago with a professor at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee named Kathleen Dolan, and she has a new book out about the role of gender in elections. And her view is that to some extent, these gender stereotypes that have to do with female candidates have become less pernicious, and moreover are oftentimes superseded by the sheer force of partisanship. And so that's where I want to be careful thinking about the role of Clinton's gender in particular, especially in a presidential election, where voters have lots of other information to draw on, and in particular, strong partisan allegiances to fall back on. So the real question for me going forward is, can we identify a measurable impact of Clinton's gender or people's attitudes about gender on their vote? Or is that stuff going to get superseded to some extent by the sort of sheer kinds of Democrat versus Republican dynamics or by other things having to do with Trump himself.
Well, and the other thing that's a challenge is it's kind of, I mean, this is a moving target. I mean, this is still ongoing. It is still unfolding. And I think I saw last week that there are some journals that are now going to begin. So one of the things that's always been a frustration for me about academia is, you write a paper, you've got to go through peer review, all of this stuff takes a while. And by the time your paper gets published about that incredible thing you learned from the Republican midterms, we're already way into Trump season. And so, who cares about what happened in the midterms?
It's not Twitter speed.
No, but I've heard, I think I saw last week that some journals are now going to be doing sort of like pre-acceptance. Like instead of, submit to us once you've got your results, that you can submit and say, hey, this is the project that's ongoing now. I'm interested in studying this question. Here are my hypotheses. Here's my plan. But you don't actually have the results yet, but they've sort of pre-accepted you into the journal to expedite the process. John, am I reporting on this correctly? Is this something that you've heard, or is this just like a thing I saw on Twitter that I'm now
this glorious dream you had?
In fact, it's true.
Oh, wonderful. Maybe everything you do read on the internet is accurate.
So I think the goal of that, it will be interesting to see if it accelerates the process. But the overriding goal of that is actually somewhat different, which is to avoid another pathology of academic publishing, which is that, when you get kind of results where, the thing that you thought would happen didn't happen, people won't submit that for publication because they're disappointed by the outcome. Or if they do submit it for publication, it won't get accepted because people aren't impressed when you show that something didn't matter. They want to see what did matter. And so sometimes the published literature is biased towards showing you effects of something. And in fact, in reality, maybe the actual effect is smaller. So if you pre-accept something, if I say, look, I'm going to do a survey and I'm going to measure these things and I'm going to run the analysis just like this. And if you think that's a good plan, then you should accept that plan and publish the results no matter what I find. So that's the goal of this pre-acceptance initiative that's going on, for example, around the 2016 American National Election Study, which is the big political science election survey. And so the hope is, I think, the value of this, you could imagine, is it takes a question like, what is the role of people's gender attitudes in their vote for Clinton versus Trump? It means that you can perhaps publish an analysis that helps to speak to that question, regardless of whether you find that gender matters or it doesn't matter. As long as the plan for the analysis seems sound as social science methodology, then it can be accepted.
Right.
So
So
it's
my hope is
herding.
that produces better research.
yeah, well, and we've, there's a story that just came out this past week about how even not in the academic world, but just in terms of polls, that it's the more dramatic polling results that always wind up getting more attention. Whereas if the bulk of polls all kind of say the same thing and it's pretty boring and the race doesn't change, nobody pays attention to it. So there's an incentive. Well, I mean, in polling, you have herding, which is the incentive going the other way,
Right.
where people don't want to diverge from the norm. They don't want to be the one that's way out on a limb. But if you're fighting for sort of precious real estate in an academic journal, having a paper that says, well, we did this whole research study and what we found is
Gender doesn't matter.
we don't really know.
Party only matters.
It's
right.
not that really big of a deal. That's
This
certainly
is
less
why-
exciting than we've discovered that the secret to Trump's success is whether or not you prefer diet soda or full calorie soda.
Right. This is why you need to publish the polls, all of them.
Not just some of them. Says who?
Right.
John, thank you so much for joining us. If people want to find your writing, your work, where can they find you?
You can find the monkey cage living at the Washington Post. A simple Google search for the monkey cage will pop it up for you. We're on Twitter, and the handle there is @monkeycageblog. And find us on Facebook as well. We're sitting there, I think, easily findable if you go looking.
Wonderful. Well,
Good.
thank you for doing your part to make monkeys in political science great again.
Thank you very much, guys, for having me.
Thank you, John. We really appreciate it.
Thank you again.